was reminded this week that God is the God of resurrections. I'm involved in the leadership of a conference that happens once a year. And this is a gathering of people who do counseling and provide retreats for pastors and missionaries. And these people gather together once a year to encourage each other, to share resources and stories with each other, just to be fed, to go back out and do it for another year. 30 plus years ago, there were just a handful of people doing this. Today, there are over 200 different ministries around the U.S. and Canada that provide counseling and retreat for and rest for pastors and their spouses. And I'm a part of the leadership of this conference. I've been attending this conference for almost 20 years. And this year, we were going to meet at a conference center called Ridgecrest, which is just northeast of Asheville, North Carolina. Now, if you've seen the news at all, you know that the news is reporting that Asheville is basically wiped off the map. That's not really true. Hundreds of people have been affected, a lot of damage and everything, but there are thousands of people that haven't been affected. But communication was cut off with this conference center. We were making phone calls, sending emails, calling people's personal cell phones and leaving messages. We were hearing nothing. So our leadership team struggled with this all last week. And Thursday night, we had a Zoom conference call, and we made the extremely difficult decision that on Friday morning we would send out a notice that the conference was canceled because we just heard nothing. Friday morning, I was preparing that message to go out, and while I was finishing it up, the call came from the Ridgecrest Conference Center that says, "Oh, we're planning on you. We had very little damage. We have access. We can get supplies. In fact, our people, their staff, needs the work. They need to get back to normal." And they said, you're a relatively small conference in terms of the kind of conferences this place holds. I mean, they have a dining hall that seats 1,000 people at once. They have 2,000 beds on their property. It's a massive facility. And we were just a small conference that was going to come in. And there were going to be other conferences going on around us. And they said, "No, come, we need you." And I watched God resurrect what I thought when I went to bed on Thursday night and got up Friday morning. I thought that was dead. I thought it was dead. And then by noon on Friday, it was resurrected. And instead of sending out a note saying our conference is canceled, we sent information, "No, we're all systems go." And it's just a reminder that we worship the God of resurrection. And when James talks about this in his letter to us, he frames it in a discussion about faith. Remember, James is really concerned about helping us navigate the minefields of life. He wants us to be able to figure out how to walk through the minefields that we live in and live. And not only just survive, but to thrive in the middle of those minefields. That's what James wants for you and for me. And so he talks about what this faith looks like. And I'll preface this by saying there are a lot of people who do not like this passage from James because the whole Reformation started because, Luther came to the conclusion that salvation was through faith. And all the works that the church that he came out of was promoting that that didn't determine anything. James comes along and he says, nah, there's a bit of a balance in here. There's not one or the other, it's both and this is how he frames it. He says, what good is it? What good is it, brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? That's the big question. The highlight is mine. Can such faith save them? He goes on, suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. Someone is in need. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? Ouch. Ouch. There's a point at which you and I have to stop and say, what am I doing for other people? What am I doing for the people who have less than I do? And maybe you think you have very little, but you still have more than somebody else. What am I doing for the people who have very little? In the same way, James says, faith by itself is not if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. If it's not accompanied by action, it is dead. But some of you will say, you have faith, I have deeds. So we can say, hey, I have faith that God is going to save me. And somebody else says, well, I'm just a good person, I do good things, and certainly God is going to save me. And James makes this statement. He makes a statement that gives me pause. Because he says, show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. Oh, he's linking those two together. He's saying it's not enough just to have faith, you have to do faith. And he makes it really clear. He says, okay, you believe, you have faith that there's a God? Good. Even the demons believe that. Even the demons believe that. Do you know that the demons believe that there is one God? They do. They do. They believe that there's one God. It's easy to believe in God. It's another thing to put our faith in God and to have the faith of God. You foolish person, James says. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? And he gives us the evidence. He goes back in Israel's history and he tells a bit of a story that all the Israelites that he was writing to, at this point he's just writing to Jewish believers, all those people that come out of the Jewish tradition who now believed in Jesus, they all knew this story. He says, was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? Remember the story? Remember Abraham believed God, and he left the place that he was from, and he traveled to a distant land, and God promised Abraham and Sarah, his wife, that they would become the couple that gave birth to a mighty nation, a nation so numerous that you couldn't number them. It would be greater than the number of the grains of sand on the seashore. And he says, do you remember Abraham? You remember that when God gave him a son, finally, after many years of waiting, God gave him a son. And then he did the totally unthinkable. He asked Abraham to sacrifice his son. To sacrifice his son. And Abraham loaded his son and some wood, and they left on a donkey, and they traveled to the place where God had indicated they should go, and Abraham put his son on that altar, and he was prepared to drive a knife through the heart of his son when God stopped him. God stopped him. And James reminds the people of Israel of that incredible story. And he says this, he says, you see that Abraham's faith and Abraham's actions were working together. His faith and his actions were working together. And his faith was made complete by what he did. So James puts us in this position of questioning, if all we have is faith, is our faith complete? Is it complete? And James basically says no. He says, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. Not by faith alone. So I want to take just a few minutes to expand on this idea. There are two kinds of faith that followers of Jesus are asked to exercise. One is faith in Jesus, and one is to exercise the faith of Jesus. There's faith in Jesus, and there's the faith of Jesus. Jesus himself tells a story in Matthew 25 about sheep and goats. It is a disturbing story because he says there's a day coming when the shepherd is going to separate the sheep from the goats. Now, in their economy, in their agricultural economy, they often let sheep and goats graze together. And so when it came time for shearing of the sheep, or it came time to send them to market, they would separate the sheep from the goats. This was an image that everybody was familiar with. They'd watch this happen. They'd participate in this. Maybe they helped with it. This was common, separating sheep from goats. And Jesus tells a story, and he says, when that day comes that the shepherd is going to separate the sheep from the goats, he's going to look at some of us and say, when I was hungry, when I was naked, when I was sick, you did nothing to help me. You're worthless. Go away. And he's going to look at other people and say, hey, when I was hungry and thirsty and naked and in prison and sick, you took care of me. And he says to us and to his listeners, when you do things like that, you're doing it as if you are doing it to Jesus himself. This one is hard for us. It's hard for me, okay? Almost every week. In fact, this week, it was 3 times this week. We had somebody stop by the office or call us on the phone, desperate for some kind of financial aid. And we've learned to ask questions to determine, what the level of this need is, and is it even possible to help meet this need? If we give money out of our benevolence fund, is it even going to begin to help them with the situation that they face? Sometimes, if they have a $1,000 electric bill, the couple $100 that we could help with isn't going to keep their electricity from being turned off. And so you have to consider, how do we really help? And then there's sometimes that people call and they want food. And there's several food pantries in town, and we recommend that people go there and get groceries. And I've watched in frustration some of those food pantries. I really like the ecumenical Lord's Cupboard. I often refer to it as the Lord's Food Pantry. We featured them a year ago in our missions conference. We had Virginia Vander Linden come and share with us about that ministry, because I'm really impressed with how they do it. They just give away food. They don't stockpile anything. One of the things that has frustrated me by so many food pantries is that they ask for donations and the food comes in and people label it. They write the expiration date, in magic marker on the top of the can or the box or the bag or whatever it is. And then they put it in a closet, and, a year later they go and throw all the food away that got expired. Because, well, they didn't give it away. And one of the things that Jesus is addressing in the parable of the sheep and goats, one of the things that James is talking about is our tendency to substitute good intentions for actions. We can have the best intentions in the world, but if we don't do something about it, our intentions are useless. They're just useless. We can have the best idea, the best plan, the best resources. We can have all the details put together, but unless we do something, if we don't take action, it doesn't make any difference. And it's not only that. There is implied in Jesus' story about the sheep and the goats, and also in James' statement about faith and action, there's implied another statement that goes along this. Not only should we never substitute good intentions for actions, but we have to deploy the resources responsively and responsibly. We have to do it in response to people's needs, but we have to be responsible about it too. And that's what the faith of Jesus looks like, because the faith of Jesus serves others. The faith of Jesus serves others. But there's another part to the faith of Jesus, because the faith of Jesus is also sacrificial. It's also sacrificial. Let's go back to the story that James uses, the story of Abraham and Isaac and God. Because when Abraham took his son, he didn't announce to all his servants and his family and everybody else around him, he didn't announce what he was going to do. He just quietly left to go do it. The only witness to Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac was God. It was God. Way too often, you and I fit into this pattern where when we do something, we want people to notice what we're doing. But quietly, serving, sacrificially giving, that is what really makes a difference for our faith of Jesus. Because it's the kind of faith that Jesus showed us. He sacrificed. He went to a cross. And if you've grown up in church, there was a song that we used to sing a lot called "He Could Have Called 10,000 Angels to rescue him from that cross," but he didn't. He just died. He just died. He made that sacrifice for us. That's the faith of Jesus. The faith of Jesus is the quiet, daily rhythm of recognizing God at the center. The quiet, daily rhythm of just recognizing God in the position that He already is in. We're just asked to recognize Him in that position and to stop trying to take that away. Not only is the faith of Jesus a faith that serves others and a faith that sacrifices without seeking attention, the faith of Jesus is also subversive. Now, I know that when we use the word subversive, and I've used it before, and people are always confused because we think of being subversive as negative. But I just want you to think with me that Jesus was the most effective, positive subversive in all of history. He was subversive when He said, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." That's a subversive statement. Jesus was subversive when He went into the temple and drove out the money changers and declared that His Father's house was going to be a house of prayer. Jesus was subversive when he healed a person on the Sabbath, which was not allowed. Seems incredible to us that they didn't allow you to heal, to pray for somebody to be healed on a Sabbath. What else is the Sabbath for? But Jesus was subversive. And we skipped over something in this passage from James chapter 2, and I want to go back to it now, because James talks about how we too have an example of subversive faith. He talks about Rahab, who subverts the enemy. Remember the story about Jericho? Remember the spies that went in to check out Jericho? Joshua sent these spies in to check everything out. And all these Israelites were just across the river. The people of Jericho anticipated an attack, so they were on point looking for spies. And sure enough, they identified spies, and these spies took refuge in Rahab's apartment, house, whatever you want to call it, which was in the wall itself of Jericho. The walls were massive. And they took refuge in her house, and she helped them escape, sent them on their way, knowing which way to avoid, because the soldiers, the authorities in Jericho would be looking for them along certain routes. This is what James says. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous? He's got prostitute and righteous in the same sentence. Was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? You see, my friends, the faith of Jesus, means the last will be first, and the walls of Jericho will fall. Our faith, the faith that serves others, the faith that sacrifices without seeking attention, and the faith that we employ in such a way that we subvert the culture around us, that faith is the faith of Jesus. That is the faith that allows us to face walls in our lives and watch them come down. That is the faith that means you and I can have hope in the middle of the most desperate circumstances we can possibly imagine. In the face of a diagnosis that we don't like. In the face of a treatment plan that's going to cost us money and pain. In the face of financial disaster, of broken relationships. In the face of economic disaster. We find ourselves practicing not only faith in Jesus, but the faith of Jesus. So James says, as a body without a spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. As the body that doesn't have a spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. And he challenges us. He challenges us to have a genuine, authentic faith. He wants our faith to be so encompassing that it's not only something that we believe, but it's something we do. And the two are linked together. When I've tried to explain this to kids, I've often used the illustration of if you sit in a rowboat and you label one oar faith and the other oar works, and you only use one or the other, you will go in a circle. But if you use the two together, you get to your destination. That's an illustration that breaks down really easily, but it is a simple way of looking at how faith and works are joined together, are inextricably linked together. And the faith of Jesus calls us to a faith that is filled with service, that is filled with sacrifice without looking for attention, and that marches into our culture and we're just quietly subversive. We just do the things that are right, even when nobody is looking, and we move. We put one step in front of the other, and we just keep going. Maybe it's something as simple as adding something extra to the tip when you have lunch today. Maybe it's something as complex as sitting down with somebody who has a financial need and helping them design a budget, and then checking with them over and over and over again to make sure they're following the budget. Maybe it's anything in between those two. But I'm telling you, my friends, this is where James is challenging us. And he says, if you want to navigate the minefields of life, if you want to be able to walk through the minefield and not just survive, but thrive in the middle of it, this is what faith has to look like. This is what faith does. It doesn't just mean to believe and not do anything. I'm reminded that the definition of believe in the Amplified Bible is to trust in, rely on, and cling to. To trust in, rely on, and cling to. All those are action statements. If I trust something, if I really trust in it, then I'm going to sit in that chair if I trust that chair is going to hold me up. If I know that for sure, then I can rely on that chair. I can carry that chair with me to the other side of the field when I go to a football game and know when I open that portable chair up and sit on it, it's going to hold me. I know that, and I cling to the truth and to the work that shows other people that I not only have faith in Jesus, but I have the faith of Jesus. That's what we're called to. And James says, if you're going to navigate the minefields, if you're going to live and not just survive, but thrive in this life, this is what it takes. This is what faith looks like. This is what you do. And so he calls us to a life of faith and deeds that show our faith.